Hi, and welcome to our 13th educational segment on commercial real estate. Up to now, we've done a whole lot of financial analysis, but investing in commercial real estate is a lot more than financial analysis. Although financials are a very important part of our decision-making criteria, it really requires a holistic approach that entails analyzing the location, the market, the political and legal climate of the investment. Remember that demand is driven by population, which is in turn driven by employment. So in this market analysis segment, we will analyze employment and population growth. But note that even this is not a complete analysis, because once all is said and done and we figure out what the demand is, we have to figure out what the supplies are, what the supplies are currently and what's in the pipeline. I'm your host, Brian Shahkarmi, and let's get started. Today, we want to change the way you look at the commercial real estate market by attempting to forecast future market conditions. The age-old question whenever you try to invest in anything is it a worthy investment? To answer this question intelligently and go about it prudently, we must do four things. We must recognize the main economic drivers of the community we're trying to invest in and how they're changing. We must identify the impact of these changes on supply and demand of real estate. We must determine where these opportunities are located, and we must estimate when these opportunities will occur, a tall order. Now, this is being proactive in real estate. And if we have to do all of this, then how do we go about it and find out? The short answer is we must know the strength of the local economy, and we must understand its underlying dynamics so we can answer several vital questions for ourselves. Questions like, do we know where the wealth is moving to? That's a good thing to know. If you know where the money is moving to, then there's going to be demand, and that's where you'd want to be. Do we know where the population is moving to? Because where the population moves to, there is going to be demand. And where there is demand is a good place to make an investment. We need to know where the land uses are changing. For example, when farmland is being switched to residential, commercial, or industrial land. It would be great to know the vacant land prices and their trends. The location and direction of major road construction is going to have a huge impact on our real estate investment, because where the roads and construction goes, there's going to be demand, there's going to be growth. The location and direction of major water and sewer projects is another key indicator for us, because there cannot be any growth without water and sewer. And when all the above happens, zoning changes generally come along with it. It's important to know where the zoning is changing to what, because it'll have a huge impact on our investment. The number and types of permits being issued is a key indication of where the development is headed. And finally, the changes in the neighborhood trends, such as conversions, gentrifications, decline, or growth, can and will have an impact on our investment. I always hear this saying that real estate is all about three things: location, location, and location. So location plays a huge part in our investment decision making. And that being the case, why buy in a place where there is stagnant employment or declining employment for that matter? And we will get to why that is in a moment. Because given the employment situation, even if it looks good at the time you're buying the property, you might run into considerable vacancy in the future, where you might have to lower the rent considerably. And lower rent means declining net operating income, which leads to a devaluation of your building and therefore your investment. So let's go back to the strength of the local economy. What defines this so-called strength? The short answer is jobs and/or employment. So employment is the number one economic indicator, and it comes in two folds. Our number one and strongest economic strength indicator is basic employment, and we will open this up much further. And if we have basic employment, it would make sense to have a non-basic employment as our second economic indicator. Let me add that basic and non-basic employment is probably not what you might think it is. Basic employments are jobs that produce more goods and services that can be consumed by the local economy. As a result, they are exported, which means others are buying it with their dollars. Therefore, a lot of dollars are imported into the local economy. Let me give you a very, very simple explanation. Suppose our local economy is made of 10 people. Suppose our local economy makes cookies for a living. Let's further suppose that we produce 100 cookies a day, but only consume 10 cookies a day in our local economy. Therefore, we can export 90 cookies a day to the neighboring economies. They buy our cookies and pay for it with the old mighty US dollar, and this dollar is then returned to our economy. Non-basic employment, on the other hand, are jobs that only serve and service the local economy. That would be if we only produce 10 cookies a day for our 10 people in our local economy. We're producing just enough for our consumption and nothing to export. Countries, states, cities, counties, and municipalities literally compete and fight for basic employment by offering a lot of incentives, such as tax abatements to basic employers. But why would they do that? The answer is very simple, because one basic job creates multiple non-basic jobs. And therefore, we can deduce that basic employment is the creator of wealth. And therefore, these jobs create the wealth of the local economy and are great, reliable indicators of a growing economy. Therefore, to know and understand the local economy, we must know and understand its economic base. And this economic base can be thought of as all the employments and jobs that export goods and services out of our local economy, quote unquote, the export industries. Therefore, if you know the local economy's basic employment, you'll be able to tell if the economy is growing or contracting. Because the growth or contraction of the local economy is a reliable indicator of supply and demand for real estate. So why is it so important to forecast future demand? Well, it's important because it'll help you understand if you're heading in the right direction with your investment. And back to the old question, is it a worthy investment? To answer that, we're going to have to answer another question. Is there going to be enough demand? To answer this question, I want to take you back to our first educational series on real estate cycles and what drives what. Although we're looking at a car speedometer here, we're not talking about that type of a drive. Our economic vehicle here is employment. So we start with employment, which is the main driver of the economy. As discussed just a few minutes ago, this employment comes in two parts, basic and non-basic. And so therefore your total employment then is the sum of all your basic and your non-basic employment. Let's take a look at this from bottom to top. Total employment here, which is made up of your basic and non-basic employment. This total employment drives the population and its growth, which in turn drives our disposable income. Total employment then gives rise to office and industrial demand, and the population it creates gives rise to residential demand. And this residential in turn again gives rise to industrial demand, where the population is going to need everything from toilet paper to toothpaste. And our disposable income, of course, gives rise to retail demand. That's where we do a lot of shopping when we have money. For a better understanding of this, let's look at it top to bottom. We start with basic employment, the most important driver of the economy and total employment. Basic employment then leads to total employment, or is the driver of total employment. And this employment is the driver of population, which in turn is the driver of the disposable income. Total employment then drives industrial and office demand. Total population is responsible for residential demand, which in turn is responsible for more industrial demand. And that disposable income is responsible for retail demand. So let's go back to, is it a worthy investment? What can tell us that? In short, an economic-based analysis can tell you. So now, what's an economic-based analysis, or EBA? It analyzes the local economy's basic employment categories and how they stimulate growth. And this is accomplished by 1, comparing basic employment to non-basic employment, and 2, by comparing the size and impact of a particular industry in relation to the state or national level. And this makes it possible to predict how industry-level trends impact a particular market. To do this economic-based analysis, we'll make 5 assumptions as follows. The key here is that there is a direct and stable relationship between basic employment and total employment called the economic-based multiplier, or EBM. So what we're saying is that total employment equals basic employment times some multiplier. 2, and just as importantly, total population is dependent on the local population to employment ratio, or the PER. 3, population can be calculated by multiplying the total employment by the local population to employment ratio, or PER. 4, our local economy is an open system. And finally, our national economy is a closed system. So now, what is an economic-based multiplier, or EBM? The short answer is that it's a ratio. In fact, it's the total local employment divided by the total local basic employment. And you better hope that this ratio is much more than a 1. And if this multiplier is high, it generally signifies that we're looking at a metro area, such as Houston, Dallas, or Atlanta area. But what does this economic-based multiplier mean, and why does it matter? Let's start with what it means. And to demonstrate, let's do a quick example. We'll consider Virginia City, and I thought I made up this city because I live in Virginia, and it doesn't exist here. However, there is one in the state of Nevada. Suppose Virginia City has an economic-based multiplier of 25. What does this mean? Well, it means that for every 1 basic job created, there are 24 non-basic jobs created. So if Virginia City creates 100 new basic jobs, that means that it will also create 2,400 new non-basic jobs, which is a multiplier of 24. Therefore, creating a total of 2,500 new jobs. So the question again, why does economic-based multiplier matter? Because it helps analysts and developers figure out the needs through employment growth, leading to population growth, leading to demand for space and many other economic needs. Now let's look at population to employment ratio, or the PER. Exactly what is it and what does it mean? It means that every job creates an increase in the population, where the total population is a multiple of total employment and a population to employment ratio. And this is the second most important ratio needed to forecast the population growth, because population and its increase is what drives the demand for space. Obviously, if you don't have the population, you'll have a lot of empty spaces. I did say population to employment ratio, which means that it's a ratio. In this case, it's a ratio of total population to total employment. So an economic-based analysis can help us forecast market growth but we have to go through a series of steps and iterations to achieve it. So what are these steps? They're mainly mechanical steps, meaning they're not quantum mechanics or quantum physics. But first, we have to identify the basic sectors of the economy. And to do that, we need four things. We need to know what the total basic employment is. We need to know what the total employment is. We, of course, need to know what the economic base multiplier is. And we need the population to employment ratio. Once we have these, we can forecast the market growth. And we forecast market growth by forecasting the population growth. We'll start by identifying the local economic base sector by sector through their 1, production levels, and 2, export potentials. We'll find out which industries account for the greatest share of export-oriented employment. We will then disaggregate these jobs sector by sector, and we'll find out what percentage of jobs in specific industries or sectors contribute to the economic base. Basic sectors' company-level employment is estimated from their sales and service. For example, if 80% of the company's revenue comes from sale to outside of the local economy, then it is assumed that 80% of the company's employees are engaged in basic employment. There are two methods of identifying basic employers. One, of course, is a direct survey method, which we go around and interview all these companies and find out which ones are basic employers. This can be very accurate if we go door to door and interview key personnel of major employers. Or we can do it the local quotient method. So unless you have an unlimited amount of time, money, and resources on your hand by going door to door and interviewing people, local quotient method is the preferred method. The local quotient is a ratio of the total local employment to total national employment in the same industry, and uses statistical indexing with moderately accurate results. And it's definitely the most cost-effective way. We can extract the local and national employment from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it's done using the NAICS, or the North American Industry Classification System. This is what replaced the SIC codes. As I mentioned, the local quotient is a ratio of the small e to the big E. And the small e's and the big E's are ratios themselves, where the small e is the ratio of the local industry level employment to the total local employment. And the big E is the ratio of the national industry level employment to the total national employment. Because LQ is a ratio, it falls into 3 categories. The LQ can be less than 1, greater than 1, or equal to 1. If LQ is less than 1, then that sector is not part of local economy's economic base. And that's because it produces less than it consumes. If LQ is equal to 1, it is still not part of the local economy's economic base, as it produces just as much as it consumes, and therefore it is not exporting. And our third option is if LQ is greater than 1, which means that this sector is part of the local economy's economic base and it produces more than it consumes. Going back to LQ less than 1, the community does not produce enough goods and services and therefore not a basic employment. If LQ equals 1, the community produces just as much as it consumes, and therefore it is not considered part of the basic sector. And the golden nugget is if LQ is greater than 1, which means that we produce more than we consume locally, and therefore we export the rest of it, bringing in dollars into the local economy. We start with calculating basic employment. In short, we have to calculate it for every sector whose local quotient is greater than 1. Then we sum up all these categories to come up with the total basic employment. The basic employment for each category where the local quotient is greater than 1 is the local industry employment category multiplied by a ratio or a percentage. That's this LQ minus 1 over LQ. Remember that not all jobs or employments in a category or sector are basic employment. Only a percentage of them are. To find the basic employment in each category or sector, we must multiply them by a ratio or percentage that signifies basic employment. And that ratio or percentage is this LQ minus 1 divided by LQ. Once we have the basic employment for each category, we simply add them up to get the total basic employment. Remember that it's all about forecasting the population growth. And now that we know all this, we can actually forecast it. And we forecast them through a series of 8 simple steps. We start by calculating the economic base multiplier. We then find the existing population from the Census Bureau. We can now find the population to employment ratio, or the PER. We then move to find the basic employment increase. This is done through contacting companies, through newspapers, through planning commissions, cities, municipalities, etc. We then forecast the total employment increase or the employment change by multiplying the above by the economic base multiplier. Once we've forecasted the total employment increase, we add it to the existing employment and we come up with the total forecasted employment. Simultaneously, we can forecast the population increase by multiplying the forecasted total employment increase and the population to employment ratio. We can now forecast the new total population, which is comprised of the change in population added to the existing population. And here are the 8 steps. So what could a population change mean? I'm honestly not trying to sound like an attorney or an accountant, but it all depends on whether there's an increase or a decrease in population. An increase in population will mean more demand for not only space, but for everything from toilet papers to toothpaste, to gas and auto service needs, to medical needs, to social and entertainment needs, to parks and recreation needs, and etc. And this demand increase will probably mean a higher future net operating income, which is a music to the investor's ears. A decrease then acts in the opposite direction, causing a reduction to the net operating income, and therefore property values. So what scenario would you like your investment to be in? So what would a population change tell you? I don't know about you, but it tells me that there's growth coming in the local area of interest, and that's a huge plus for me. So far, we have laid down a lot of information in front of you, and perhaps things may look much more complicated than they are, or should be. An example at this point would really serve us well and help us digest everything that we talked about. So let's drive our points home with example 2 for XYZ County. You are a real estate investor considering investing in XYZ County. However, you're not sure if this is the right place to invest or not. Does XYZ County merit real estate investment consideration? Below are the active sectors of the XYZ economy for our consideration provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And here's a larger depiction. So this by itself does not tell me a darn thing. I don't understand it. To answer any investment related question, I have to take all this raw data and transform them into a discernible format. A format that would allow me to make a logical and intelligent decision. And that requires an economic-based analysis. We start by finding the local quotient, or the LQ, which is the ratio of the small e to the big E. And remember that both small e's and big E's are ratios themselves. And so the small e is the local industry level employment to the total local employment, and the big E is the ratio of the national industry level employment to the total national employment. Let's see what they look like. To find the small e For the utilities category, for example, we take the number of XYZ county employees for the utilities sector, which is 722, and we divide it by the total number of jobs in the XYZ county, which is 347,069. And we find our small e to be 0.002080. By the same token, to find the big E for the utilities category, we will divide the national or U.S. number of employees in this sector, which is 547,807, by the total national or U.S. employment number of 110,769,280, which will give us a ratio of 0.004945. And we will do this for all the categories, for the small e and for the big E. Remember that a local quotient or LQ of anything larger than 1 signifies a basic employment sector. And remember that our local quotient or LQ is the ratio of the small e to the big E. Knowing this, we will go back to our table to calculate our local quotient or LQ. LQ then is the small e divided by the big E. So for the utilities, it would be 0.00208 divided by 0.004945. And we do this for all the sectors, and we have our LQ. And remember that we're looking for LQs larger than 1 because it signifies basic employment. So we separate the ones that are larger than 1. And when we run it across, we see that there are 8 sectors in the XYZ county that are basic employers. We have identified all the basic sectors or categories in the XYZ county in green. As an example, construction category has a total of 18,980 jobs, but not all the jobs in this category are basic jobs. Only a percentage of them are. To find the number of basic jobs in this category, we must multiply them by a certain ratio or percentage. This ratio or percentage is the LQ minus 1 divided by LQ. So we now find this ratio as depicted here. To find the total number of basic jobs in the construction category, we will multiply this ratio by the total number of construction jobs in the XYZ county. That would be multiplying 0.039230 by 18,980, which results in a total of 745 basic jobs in the construction category in XYZ county, noted in dark green. To find the total basic employment in XYZ county, we take the basic employment in each category in dark green, and we total them up for a total basic employment of 85,136. This is the same depiction with all the totals, our 85,136,000 total basic employment and our total employment for XYZ county of 347,069. We now have almost everything that we need to forecast the population. Why do I say almost? It is because down the road, we have to find the existing population from the Census Bureau, and we also have to do some legwork to find the increase in basic employment. Otherwise, we're well on our way to do our economic base analysis. And we'll start with our 8-step process. We will calculate the economic base multiplier. Remember that this is a ratio. We have a multiplier of 4.08, which is the ratio of the total employment in our community divided by the basic employment in the community. So exactly what does this economic base multiplier of 4.08 mean? Or let's simply call it a multiplier of 4. It means that for every 1 basic jobs, there are 3, or in our case, 3.08 non-basic jobs are created. Next, we get our existing population from the Census Bureau, and we have that to be 794,900. We now move to find the population to employment ratio. Since we already have the total population and we already have the total employment for XYZ County. All we have to do is divide them by each other, and lo and behold, we have the population to employment ratio, or PER, of 2.29. This is where we have to do some legwork to find the basic employment increases. And we have that to be 1,150 new basic jobs. Now, therefore, we can forecast our total employment increase by multiplying our economic base multiplier and the forecasted basic employment increase. We already have both factors, and therefore our forecasted total employment increase is calculated to be 4,688. Our new forecasted total employment is then the existing total employment plus the change, and we have both of them. And that is calculated to be the sum of these two, which is 351,757. We are now in a key part. We can now forecast the population increase by multiplying our population to employment ratio and the forecasted total employment. And we already have both of them. Our population to employment ratio of 2.29 and the forecasted total employment increase of 4,688. Multiplying the two results in forecasted population increase of 10,737 people. And now to get to the new forecasted total population, we add the population change or increase to the existing population. And we have both of them as well. This then is calculated to be 805,637 people. Let's do a total snapshot of the whole thing. $10,000 new bodies come into town. These people have a lot of needs, and space is just one of them. In conclusion, this is a vibrant area. At a minimum, I would look at a multifamily, retail, or office space, but I would also do a void analysis first to be certain. We've only done a population and therefore demand analysis. To make the right decision in terms of space or real estate, we must know what is currently in the market or the existing supply. We must also know what is being constructed or is in the pipeline and what is being converted to various other uses. This must be done so you have the entire picture before deciding. As always, if you have any questions regarding what we just discussed, please send me an email to the following link, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. Thank you for your time.